Hello and welcome to the 259th episode of Real Hawk Talk. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger, and I am joined tonight by my mirror image north of the border, Jeff Simmons, at Real Jeff Simmons on Twitter. The only person I know that is excited and willing and likely also himself sending and receiving texts at 5 a.m. about the draft and about some rumor and some conversation because, folks, we are all in. It is less than 48 hours away from the Seahawks making what might be the most important draft decision of the franchise's history. I we'll talk about that a little bit. I think there's a case to be made, Jeff, that the number 5 pick in this draft will be the most important decision in franchise history. I'll talk about that more soon. Jeff, let's bring you in, man. How are you? How's life?
Oh, man, I'm anxious. I'm excited, nervous. The Seahawks have never had a pick like this, and even just taking the Seahawks out, I think the draft's my favorite sports event of the year. I know people look at me like especially in Canada, people look at me like I'm completely insane when I say that. I know there's like NCAA March Madness first day or week 1 of the NFL or the Masters. All those are pretty good, but like I can't think of an event where I wait for like 3 months, like counting down the days. And usually I'm just doing it because I like the implications of how it impacts the NFL, the fantasy, the gambling markets, all these kinds of things. And now, last year, I remember I was terrified. The Seahawks hadn't had a good draft in like 10 years. They traded Russell and Bobby. I did not enjoy the buildup. I was even looking back at like a lot of the stuff that was said. The fact that they had a normal pick, I remember I was almost in shock when they picked Charles Cross that it was normal. And this year just feels so different. I remember I watched with my brother, and I was just like, I didn't say a word. I don't think I ever, because there's been so many years where they pick a guy and I have to Google him, or we had the Creed Humphrey year where we were on together, and the Jordan Brooks year where we were on together, whereas we were all miserable. So again, there's so much to talk about. I'm so fired up that we're at draft week, and these last couple days are hard. I'm just so ready.
I mean, not just having 10 picks in this draft, not just having 5 picks in the top 83, but having 2 first-round picks and one of those picks in the top 5 in a draft that has players that you need at positions, multiple positions that you need, and some places depth in those positions. This is like being able, like, winning a shopping spree and having that shopping spree be at Cartier. I don't know. Maybe that's too high end, but this is a pretty good. I know a lot of people are crapping on this draft, and I don't quite get it. I think it's maybe because there's not the top elite talent at the top of the draft, and maybe it only goes 5 deep of blue chip potential instead of 10 or 12 deep or something like that. As a typically cynical guy, maybe like not as optimistic about how these things work out, I am very bullish on a ton of different ways this can go for Seattle. And as I was explaining to Rachel, we were taking a walk today, my wife, I'm not just excited to get to the draft, Jeff, and see who they pick, but this is kind of feeling like this could be when the Seahawks become really fun again. And this team could really be on the upswing. And it just, like, imagine past the draft, if they have another exciting crew coming in, all of a sudden I am interested in training camp. I am interested in how this is all going to play out in a way that I don't think we've really felt for a while.
And you really hit that. And if you listen to like any national show right now, when they get to like going through the top 10, or the way they talk about the Seahawks roster is just really different. They're really highly regarded, and typically in personnel. And I kind of grew up getting into football through the personnel side. The rule of thought is it takes 2 drafts to turn a franchise around. And the Seahawks entering last year's offseason had one of the bleakest roster situations They were old. They didn't have a lot of good players. And then they crushed that draft out of the park. They crushed free agency. They've had another influx of talent in free agency this year. And that second draft in a row, and it's really what pushes the team. And if you get 3, you can become a Super Bowl contender. But it's usually 2 that turn the teams around. And the Jets had that draft last year, and they went from like unbearable, and all of a sudden, and it was the Bengals too. They got Burrow, and then they got Chase and Higgins, and they went from year 1 of Burrow, where they're 5-11. Next year, they're in the Super Bowl. It's that second draft, and the Seahawks have, I think, the second best capital. And you're the only one I've seen tweet this, but the NFC is just, I think what makes the context is the Seahawks don't even just have an ascending roster that's getting better. The NFC is very open. And if you look at the AFC, it's like the chatter is like every quarter. Now Rodgers in the AFC. If you get through the AFC, you can't get by with a Geno Smith. You would not be able to survive in the AFC unless your roster is 2013 Seahawks. There's just too many good quarterbacks. The NFC, there's the Eagles, there's the Niners, and then who? Then the Seahawks are just in there with the opportunity. We talked about this for years. Brady and Rodgers are going to leave soon. There's no good quarterbacks, and every quarterback has basically ended up in the AFC. So this draft, the hardest thing in football is to go from good to great, and the Seahawks have that chance. And that's why I agree with you. This is a massive, massive opportunity given the context.
I am pulling up something here. Okay. I agree with everything you said, although I feel like you're selling Geno Smith a little bit short.
That's fair, but look, they got Burrow, Lawrence.
Well, let me ask you this to see if you know this off the top of your head. Who were the top 5 quarterbacks in passing touchdowns last year? And no particular order, and don't look it up. Just as best you can guess.
I'd guess Mahomes.
That's 1.
Allen.
That's 2.
Hurts. No, Hurts missed a bunch of games, so it wouldn't be him.
Nope. Hurts is actually not even in the top 10.
Yeah, he got hurt. I forgot about that. Burrow.
Burrow's 3. You hit the top 3, by the way. That's Mahomes, Burrow, Allen. 1, 2, 3.
Trevor Lawrence.
Good guess, but no.
Herbert.
Good guess, but no.
And Geno might have been up there.
He is one of them. So Geno Smith, people forget this. Geno Smith threw 32 touchdowns last year. He was the only. He led the NFC in passing touchdowns last year. The entire NFC.
Yeah.
And that includes Aaron Rodgers, who had 26. Geno had 32. Kirk Cousins was behind him with 31. But I mean, Geno Smith. I think Geno Smith has really continued to be underestimated by even Seahawks fans.
Yeah, fair.
He had, I think, an excellent start to that year, and then had a less than excellent back half of the year, and then he had an excellent playoff game against the best defense in the NFL. And anyway, the reason I'm hammering on this is we were talking about the best teams in the NFC. There's no question it's the 49ers and the Eagles. Like, there's no question, right?
Yeah.
The best quarterback in the NFC? I think you could make a case that Geno could end up being the best quarterback in the NFC next year.
Yeah. Jalen Hurts, Geno. Dak started to dwindle a little bit.
Purdy? I mean, it really? Like
Goff, like Purdy? I don't know.
So, I mean, I look at Geno Smith he was in a quarterback competition last year. He comes into this year knowing that job is his. He is going to be able to, he's been working with the receivers, hopefully. He's got a year in the offense. I think people are sleeping. I think he's got more upside. So I think you put a nice team around him. You add some more talent to that mix. You get a better interior offensive line. You get, dual running backs, and maybe you get that third receiving option. Come on, dude. I'm in. That should be fun. But we will not talk more about Geno right now, because we have plenty of time for that. Another pod. I gotta ask, man. Number 5 comes up right now. who are you hoping the Seahawks, like, who's your heart set on? Who are you going to be most upset about if they don't call his name?
I've come around on this. I think it's Jalen Carter. And the way the draft is shaking out, Will Anderson's been my guy the whole process since we started. And his floor is just, the Baltimore Ravens used to have a thing. They just try to hit doubles in the first round. I've played for the team to draft like them for years. And the way the draft, depending on the one pick, there is a chance that Will Anderson does fall to 5. So I would be thrilled with that scenario. But because of the edge rush depth and because of the Seahawks roster, I wouldn't be devastated if they passed on him. And there's this like school of thought, like, well, he's not a Bosa, he's not a Myles Garrett. I find that kind of stupid. If he was a Bosa went number 2 overall in the same draft. And that draft, the 5th overall pick was a linebacker, Devin White. Joey Bosa, no one number 3. So if there was a Bosa in this draft, they wouldn't be available at 5. So this needs to be stopped throwing out there some sort of knock on them. But to me, just we've run so many of these mock draft simulators and we've run so many of these scenarios. I just find my drafts look so much stronger when I get Jalen Carter. And we talked about just like the interior defensive line all year last year. And Draymond Jones almost kind of gets forgotten about in this. And just the idea of pairing those two guys together, I think I said this the day we did a live reaction when he signed. The idea of pairing a guy like that and just creating a massive position of strength. If Carter hits and you have Jones and Carter in the middle of your defense, that just completely changes. You went from Shelby Harris and LJ Collier to that. And like, you think about some of the best defensive lines over the years, and that's what they've had. And I know I love Will Anderson. I'd be thrilled if they drafted him. Thrilled. But I think the thing that excites me the most is if Jalen Carter hits, because I think a dominant defensive tackle duo like that, we saw it with like back in the day with Jacksonville with like Simon Stroud and Henderson, and some of the best defensive lines you saw what the Giants did last year, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams. And this just completely changes the look of and sets up the rest of the defense. And as much as I like Will Anderson, a good edge rusher is not going to push this defensive line over the top. To me, that's what changes everything.
Interesting. Well, so I want to make sure I'm hearing you right, Jeff. If Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are available at 5, who do you want the Seahawks to pick?
Like as of yesterday, I said Will Anderson, but I think in the last 24 hours, I've changed my mind. And to me, I said this morning in our chat that if it's a dream scenario, I would be thrilled with above. Both would get an A grade from me. Will Anderson's obviously safer, but again, if I want to build the nastiest defensive line I can imagine, having those two defensive tackles in there, and again, it's such an interesting thing because John on his radio show talked about today of their schedule. They're meeting with Jody Allen and going through scenarios, and I think there's a lot of chatter that Pete is the guy who really, really wants Jalen Carter, and I think that meeting with Jody Allen is going to be crucial on that front. See if that gets green lit. And I keep hearing Albert Breer mention the Jalen Carter thing, and I keep thinking about it. And I know off the field it's horrifying, but if they take him and they've green lit his medical as like off the field evaluation, to me that's the most exciting scenario.
So I'm in the same spot. You've been much more steadfast in Will Anderson. I think we've both generally been on the board of if Will Anderson's there, that's the home run. There hasn't been nearly the roller coaster with Will Anderson. I don't even think there's anything that anyone's down on him now about. But after all of that, I mean, Jeff, I've been listening, you too, I'm sure. I've been listening to a silly amount of draft podcasts from Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah to the PFF podcast to listening to, whether it's, Hugh Millen for whatever you care about with Hugh. You've got guys that have been watching these players in their various conferences. You've got, you could go on and on. Then you read from Peter King. You read from, who was the other person you just mentioned?
Albert Breer.
Albert Breer. Oh, also listening to Jim Nagy. Like, anyway, on and on and on and on. And there's Mina Kimes had a great episode recently, and I can't remember that. I think it was Demonte Jones, maybe is his name. I can't remember for sure, but he was Deontay Lee, maybe.
Oh yeah.
He was reviewing defensive players. The consistent thing I hear, Jeff, when I listen to people talk about all these players, and I'm not listening to one player, I'm just listening to them talk about all the players. Consistently, they say Jalen Carter is the most talented guy in this draft. Consistently, they say that this guy, you hear the tone and the voice of watching him play, and they're like, he does things that other guys just don't do. And he does so many things that you want your defensive tackle to do. And I mean, I was listening, I think it was the Bucky Brooks, Daniel Jeremiah Move the Sticks episode yesterday, where Bucky Brooks went on and on and on about like the Seahawks really just set up their entire offseason, all the moves, Julian Love, moving Jamal Adams down, adding Bobby Wagner, adding Devin Bush, adding Draymond Jones. You know, last year you throw in Tariq Woolen and Kobe Bryant, all those pieces. It's like there is one clear gaping hole in their plan, and it is just begging for them to add an interior defensive lineman. And both he and Daniel Jeremiah said, they went through, and you heard this too. There haven't been that many trades in the top 10 in the last few years. They just haven't been. And the one guy they both said that moves the needle enough to be worth a trade in the top 10 was Jalen Carter. That moved me. That stood me up in my seat. Of course, I was jogging when I was listening to it. But do you heard the same thing? What do you think about that?
It's just the more people I keep listening. I've been listening to like a ton. I'm listening to draft podcasts before bed every night in the morning. It's just, and you put out a tweet on it last week. These great defensive tackles are just so hard to find. And it's for him, it's all about the off-field evaluation, how the meeting went, and the character stuff the scouts have done. But just on the field, if you listen to like Mina talk or any of these scouts talk, and you can just hear the joy. And Daniel Jeremiah was talking about, they were watching like cut-ups of the draft, like he was getting ready of what he's going to see when everyone gets picked. And he said Carter's videos and Carter's clips just look completely different than anyone else in this draft. And again, Will Anderson, it's like hitting a drive right in the middle of the fairway. I think you know exactly what you're getting. It's clean, it's easy, and I'd be thrilled with that pick. But Jalen just has the all-pro ceiling, and I don't know if Will does. And I think, and we talk about this a lot, the team does not have a lot of blue-chip players. And there's a lot of good players, but who are the Seahawks all-pro kind of guys? DK, we're hoping, hits that. He's got potential. He shows flashes. Tariq Woolen shows flashes. Charles Cross and Lucas were pretty good. Walker was pretty good, but they don't have that perennial all-pro kind of guy. And I think Carter is the highest ceiling of any defensive player, maybe of any player in the draft. And just to hear the scouts, the old scouts, Bucky was a scout, Daniel Jeremiah was a scout, and the way they talk about him and is just different. And again, I'd be so happy if it's one of those two guys, because when we fell the fifth pick, it seemed like that dream was dead. And now it's just the possibility of getting one of those two after this whole season of tracking those guys, to me, would be so fun.
Well, yeah, Emery Hunt's another guy. I listened to him on, I think it was a Ross Tucker podcast or something along those lines, talk about it. And he just talked about how every time Jalen Carter puts his hands on an SEC offensive lineman, you're seeing head snap back. You know, the power in his hands and how he's able to move guys it's just different. And the other thing I heard really consistently, Jeff, we've talked about all of Jalen Carter's issues off the field primarily. We've also talked about, does he love the game? Does he have effort issues? To a T, the people that I've heard talk about it in detail are like, I don't know where these questions are coming about on-field effort. I mean, the guy played as hard as they've seen anyone else play in between the lines. And yes, he got rotated in and out, but so did every other Georgia defensive linemen. It's part of how they play. I think there's more to it than that. But the point being is that I think the off-field stuff, of which is meaningful and considerable, started to blur into evaluations and narratives around his on-field effort. And I don't think there's as much there. And so if Jalen Carter, I would go as far as to say if he had not gone to his pro day, if he had opted out of that, or if it had gone differently, there'd be zero there. I think there'd be zero hesitation here. I really believe that. As it stands, I got to say, Jeff, there's one thing I'm starting to wonder about. Is he going to be there at 5? Is there a chance that he's a guy that ends up going at 2 or going at 3? Do you think that's a potential possibility?
I think it would have to take a pretty unique scenario. So basically, here's what I'm hearing. We'll go through it. 1, I think we know is going to be Bryce Young. 2, I heard 2 is where the draft starts, and it's an interesting year because we don't know anything after 2. But 2, there's a lot of chatter that CJ Stroud did not get the grade on their evaluation system where they think he's good enough to be a number 2 pick. So Lance Zierlein, who's super connected in Houston, he nailed both their first-round picks last year, has been saying it's going to be Tyree Wilson. And I saw Peter Schrager say the same thing to that. There's a lot of ties in the front office and the coaching staff to Will Anderson. So it seems unless ownership steps in, I don't think Carter's in play there. I think it's quarterback, one of those 2 defensive linemen. 3 is Arizona, they got a for sale sign. They're dying to get out. But like you said, I think the last 3 drafts, there hasn't been any trades in the top 10. Teams have not moved up. And unless you're grading CJ Stroud or someone's coming up for Will Anderson, which I don't know if they will, that leaves Arizona either someone's going to trade up for Stroud, I think, or if they're stuck at 3, a lot of the names you're hearing, which is maybe one of Wilson or Anderson. There was a rumor this week about Paris Johnson that came out that Kyler Murray's been pushing for him internally. That would be a stunner. There's been talk about Devin Witherspoon. There's no chatter on Jalen Carter right now, unless they're keeping that secret for whatever reason. But you got a new GM, a new head coach. That's a tough pick. And that franchise is just like, they have so much bad stuff off the field right now. They have the worst PR in the league right now. They've got a kind of a goofy head coach who kind of fumbled his press conference last week. Come in and kind of take that guy as your first draft pick. I don't know if you've seen their depth chart. It's the worst team in the league right now.
Yep.
And so I think they're going to, if they can't get out of 3, they're going to do something safe. I think if their first pick is an organization, I think that's a Will Anderson. I think that's a Paris Johnson, something really, really safe, easy to sell. And then 4, the Colts come, and there's 3 quarterbacks that potentially are sitting there. If Stroud goes to 3, there's still 2. And there's rumors, there's been Levis chatter, there's been Richardson chatter. So I don't really see a Carter landing spot unless Arizona shocks someone. So it really does seem like Seattle is the start of his ceiling. Because you look at the other 4 teams, I don't see, unless someone comes up for Jalen Carter, which would be shocking. And like Philly moves from 10 to 3 to get Carter, which would obviously be a gut punch. But I see Seattle as the first option.
Yeah, I hope that's true. I hope that's true. I think depending on where Houston goes, since nobody seems to really know what they're going to do, if they are finding they want to take best defensive player on the board, it's possible that Jalen Carter's a guy for them. I think that's possible. I think it's possible that Arizona, Philadelphia roots, defensive line being a priority, it's possible that they could go there. I agree that it is a bad decision. It would be a bad decision to bring a guy with the questions you've got around Jalen Carter into that organization in that situation. That does not seem like a good setup.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. It's probably not going to happen, but it has crossed my mind that we've all just assumed that this guy who is so uniformly believed to be the probably most talented player in this draft is just going to be there at 5. And that we also are saying that this draft is super hard to predict. There might be surprises. And those 2 things together make me a little bit nervous.
Yeah. This year is so unpredictable. We know 1 and that's it. But the thing I just keep coming back to is Arizona has had such bad PR, and there's so many concerns off the field. Another thing is they want to put that guy in Scottsdale, where there's a lot of nightlife. One of the things that somewhere like Seattle has been, I know Jeremiah was talking about this last night. There's concerns about sort of the crowd he runs with, and upbringing, going from where he lives in Florida and where he was in Georgia all the way across the country to Seattle, where life's a little different. That might be more appealing to the Seahawks than putting him in Scottsdale, making the number 3 overall salary. And Evan knows about Scottsdale.
Yeah, Evan can party with them. You know, and I see some of the chat comments of like, oh, you like forgotten about the issues here and with Carter, and all of a sudden he's perfect. I don't think that's it for either one of us, man. Like, do I think that did I like what I saw when I watched Jalen Carter, especially in the game against Ohio State? No, I thought he was not that impressive. Did I like what I saw in the championship game at TCU? No, actually, I didn't really. Like, there's a couple plays, but for the most part, I was not that impressed with what I saw. I see the potential issues with him as a player. Do I think that there are real issues? The fact that he showed up to his pro day overweight and that he didn't finish his drills, is that a potential that this guy is going to not live up to his talent in the NFL and be a player that just crashes and busts? Absolutely. Like, I think all of those things are still true, Jeff. What also has just become more and more clear to me is that there's a number of people who I do respect their point of view and on this stuff, and they have watched more of him than I have. I have not watched hundreds of hours of Jalen Carter tape, and the way that they talk about him relative to other prospects, the way they talk about him relative to other defensive linemen that have been available in the past few years, the way they talked about him relative to all the other players in this draft, and then looking at what we already knew, which is the Seahawks desperately need elite talent, and especially at the defensive tackle position. I don't think you can pass on it. I think it's a bigger risk to not call his name Thursday night than it is to hand in the card with his name. That's where I've landed.
That's where I felt when you put that poll out the other day, and I would be terrified to pass on him and see him go to Philadelphia and just dominate. That would beat me up for years. And we've seen the Seahawks pass on. We've seen one player the Seahawks passed on a couple of years ago that we're still not quite over. And they're still chasing that position. And yeah, I'm interested that you've come around on him, because you were down on him pretty early. You saw the playoffs. You weren't as high as him as me and some of the other guys, and now it's almost flipped. That's pretty fascinating. I do think the off-field stuff is there. Like, there are definite questions. I've heard multiple questions about effort level. I don't know if you've talked about conditioning. Conditioning's been a big issue with Carter, but I'm not the one making the draft pick. You're not the one making the draft pick. If the Seahawks greenlight is off-field stuff, to me, that's as good as a thing as I can get. And I'm not the one making the pick, so I don't have all the information. Everything on Carter off the field is not. I think Mina said it perfectly. She was on with Bob Condotti yesterday, and she said she doesn't have the information to make that evaluation. So all you can evaluate is what we know, and that's his impact on the field. And to me, his impact is the highest ceiling of anyone, and that's what you really want out of the draft, and especially this draft where Seahawks are going to get. The Seahawks might not be up here for 10 years, so. It's very exciting, and just seeing the idea that I think what's kind of turned me in the last 24 hours is just seeing that Pete's on board with it. And I know everyone's I think the idea that Pete is willing to put them in the defense, and I don't know if that's smoke, you don't know if there's a smoke screen or whatever, but if Pete is on board, like, it gets me really, really excited about this pick, because they've talked so much about character and how much that impacted last year. And if Pete still is willing to go there, that's what's flipped me in the last 24 hours.
That's interesting. Yeah. And we should acknowledge there's people out. Todd McShay has put out there multiple times that he's got multiple sources saying the Seahawks, that Carter's not going to be the pick there. And there's other folks that have that. I think they're depending on where you look, there's places saying, hey, the consensus now is very clear that Carter's the pick for Seattle. And there's other places where you say, hey, the consensus now is that the Carter is not the pick for Seattle. I don't believe that any of them know anything for the most part.
Yeah.
When people talk about sources, they're talking about often like second, third, fourth hand knowledge of what's going on in these places. And as you said, they're not going to be in the room for the Jody Allen conversation. Anything potentially could shift there. You don't know. I'm really just talking about the biggest chance for the Seahawks to become a much better team, a dangerous team this year, going into the next couple of years, is for them to get, for Jalen Carter to be their pick and for Jalen Carter to work out. Doesn't mean it will happen, but that's just the case. And so let's do it. Let's use the key to the kingdom to try and take the crown, man. Let's try to go all the way instead of being too safe. And I think it's also interesting to hear with Bucky Brooks. He's like, it's Jim Nagy. He was like, I don't understand why everyone keeps saying that Seattle needs an edge. They have Daryl Taylor and Uchenna Nwosu. Both their edges had 9.5 sacks last year. And they have Boye Mafe, who the team's really high on. That was interesting to hear. And just as a reminder, I happen to still think they need some edge. I don't think Daryl Taylor's proven himself to be an every down kind of guy. But I think he's right. And I think we've talked about that too. Willie Anderson, although I think would be great to add, I don't know that Willie Anderson takes the Seahawks from a 6.5 team to an 8. I think he might take him from a 6.5 to like maybe a 7.5 or a 7, depending on how that plays out.
Yeah, and that's sort of my point of view. I thought Nagy made a really, really good point. We were texting about this today. But Nagy was saying, he was on Softy's show yesterday, and he was talking about he seemed comfortable with the idea of Seattle taking Jalen Carter. And I don't know, again, I don't know if I've ever heard him make an outright prediction before. And I don't think he was predicting here, but he talked about the impact of Jaron Reed, who was a guy that if you follow Jim Nagy on Twitter, that was a pick that Jim was really, really involved in. And listen, there are real concerns with Jaron Reed and what he is at this point of his career. And if you look at his film last year, it was not great. And we've argued about Jaron Reed for years in this podcast. I'm blocked by him on Twitter, for the record. But Jaron Reed, he's known for, he's had some issues off the field. But in terms of like football character, Jaron Reed has a really, really good reputation with Nagy, and Nagy like loves the guy. And I think Pete Carroll made a very clear priority to bring him back once they lost Zach Allen in the free agent market. And he's a guy that I think that Nagy was saying would be a really, really good mentor for Jalen Carter. And I know people can make jokes because Reed got suspended a couple of years ago and he had the domestic violence issue, which is nothing to joke about. But just in terms of like being a pro and preparing, and Bobby Wagner and guys like that, and that was what Diggs and Sherman talked about. There's a lot of people in that bill. I never thought about the impact of Jaron Reed, who's like known as a really, really good leader. Clint Hurt talked about it. I think he went on Mike Dugar's podcast, how devastated he was when they initially lost Reed because of his leadership skills inside the building and his professionalism. And I had never even considered that. And I don't know what kind of character Draymond Jones is. I think he's a younger guy. I don't know if he's renowned for being like a locker room leader.
Yeah.
So someone like Reed and Wagner, those could be really, really good influences for someone like Carter, who needs probably learn how to be a professional, and that's why he gets tied to the Eagles so much, because his buddies Jordan Davis from Georgia is there and Kobe Dean is there. And I had never heard anyone make the Jaron Reed comparison. So that kind of made me raise my eyebrows a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That we've talked about so many things I've forgotten, but I didn't know and didn't have the notion that Jaron Reed was a strong locker room leader. That wasn't something I kind of walked around with. And so it didn't even register to me to think about Jaron Reed being a factor here. But Jim Nagy very clearly said, if you want to bring Jalen Carter into a position room with someone who's going to show him how to be a pro and how to take this game seriously, Jaron Reed's the guy you want in that room. And like you said, Jim Nagy was pretty close to the Jaron Reed pick and was part of the organization when he was there. So I think he knows what he's talking about there. I thought that was surprising for sure, and an interesting inside view, because as we all know, Jim Nagy and the Seahawks have history, and they're pretty close. So I think you got to trust a little bit what he says on those pieces. So Jeff, before we start turning to some patron questions, we've got a bunch tonight. We'll tackle those, and we've got more topics to cover here. Who knows how long we'll end up talking about all this stuff? But I want to talk about quarterback for a second, and I think the most vocal group of Seahawks fans on Twitter, at least, are Anthony Richardson fans right now. I think it's not quarterback in general. I don't hear like a lot of CJ Stroud. People are like, we got to draft. I mean, Evan certainly is, but like, I don't hear like a big, we got to take Stroud if he's there. I don't hear a lot of Will Levis love. I don't even hear a lot of Bryce Young love. Like, maybe because they don't think he'll be available. I don't hear people banging down the door hoping that somehow the Seahawks could get Bryce Young. But it's Anthony Richardson, one, and then two would be maybe Hendon Hooker is probably the second, but people have some ideas about where he'll show up. Increasingly, Jeff, it seems like there's a possibility the Seahawks could have someone like CJ Stroud and maybe Anthony Richardson available at 5. One, do you agree that seems like something that could possibly happen? And two, if it does it change your answer at all for who you want the Seahawks to pick at 5?
Yeah. So if the Colts take Will Levis, which has been a big chatter around the NFL, but they're tied to all three of these quarterbacks, but there's been a lot of talk about Levis and the Colts. And no one trades up to 3. I think both those guys are going to be on the board. And Evan's been praying for CJ Stroud for a while, and I was kind of laughing him off for a bit. I thought it was just super unlikely. I was just so convinced that Houston was going to take him at 2, and that seems pretty unlikely at this point, unless that whole thing was a lie. But if the Colts go Levis and that turns out to be true, both those guys are going to be on the board. And yeah, it's something there's been a lot of media ties to Richardson. You're right. If you're just in here the last 3 months, and one of the things that's just so easy is just to get hooked on tantalizing upside. And that's Anthony Richardson. He just has the tools that he can do things that no other quarterback in the league has ever done. And we saw what Cam Newton's done. You've seen guys like Josh Allen. And if you're sitting here just dreaming about like dream prospects and freak athletes, I kind of get why people fall for Anthony Richardson, but like, he is as much of a boomer bust prospect as you can ever imagine. So I get the upside, but that floor is low. And there are people in the media that are having trouble finding teams that like him, like they love to draft him. And the one name we keep hearing is the Seahawks, but CJ Stroud to me is just like, if you're going to bet on a quarterback, I would much rather bet on a CJ Stroud, to be honest. Just an accurate passer, a guy who reads defenses well. Obviously, the knocks on him is he's had like the best receiving core in the league, like they call him. But I personally would rate Stroud significantly higher than Richardson. And if it ends up being Stroud, I would still have Carter and Anderson ahead of them on my preference list. But I would have Stroud significantly higher than Richardson. But every indication is Richardson's a guy that John and Pete could be interested in. And that, again, could be smoke. We've been saying the whole time, me and you were both pretty against. I threw out that crazy number, that one podcast, that I just thought the draft lined up for defense. So I'm not sitting here like hoping for Anthony Richardson. If they get him, it would be an exciting concept just to like sit here and dream about the possibility of having like the freakiest offense in the NFL. But it's just, we talked about the NFC before, and it's wide open, and you're not getting this pick until 2024, maybe 2025. That's a hard thing to swallow. And it's a really hard thing to swallow. I get you're not in this position very often. I get the premium position of quarterback. And again, I think I'd be a lot more comfortable taking Richardson than you would. But I'm still much higher in getting one of these top-of-the-line defensive players because we just haven't had it. And we talk about defense. Defense comes down to so much of it just comes down to talent. And like you said, Geno is a very capable quarterback. I'm happy to give him a couple more years. And again, I think Evan's made this point, and I have agreed with him. if Pete and John do evaluate one of these guys, and like they evaluated Mahomes and Allen, if you remember when Mahomes and Allen were in the draft, they were very sketchy prospects. They were not clean looks. They were guys that a lot of teams laughed at the Bills when they drafted Josh Allen. So if they evaluate one of these guys be worth that pick, I think I'd convince myself in 2 seconds. But going in, I would have it Stroud as my third option. Richardson probably a lot lower down my list.
Yeah, there is also the other thing. I think it was Todd McShay said this, is that he's hearing that it'd be really surprising if the Seahawks don't exit the first round with a quarterback. Am I remembering? Was that McShay that said that?
It was, and that's where that Hendon Hooker thing came out. And to me, that's the worst case draft scenario. I was barely on board with Hendon Hooker when he was supposed to be a third rounder.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my Senior Bowl article, there was another executive that thought okay, Hendon Hooker in the third round would make a lot of sense for Seattle. Him and Geno have similar stylistically. You can redshirt them. Third rounder, much more understandable. But pick 20, which is what McShay was talking about, and I know there's been a lot of chatter he's going to go there. To me, that'd be close to an F pick. I would be pretty crushed by that. It's kind of amazing that the fifth pick's been getting so much chatter. We almost forgot about the 20th pick. But the opportunity cost of taking Hendon Hooker 20th overall, I just don't think profiles as the top of the line quarterback. To me, there's not a lot of quarterbacks other than Aaron Rodgers that slipped to the 20s and have hit. So, and he's an older prospect. He's coming off an ACL. He's been in kind of a goofy offense. Again, I wasn't comfortable with him in the second round. To put him at 20 would be close to an F grade for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That report scares the shit out of me.
I am really curious to see how the quarterback thing will play out for the Seahawks. I've been pretty clear. I've got a lot of money on the line. You've got a little money on the line that they are not going to draft a quarterback with that fifth pick. So we'll see how that plays out Thursday. I'll be surprised if they take a quarterback in the first 2 rounds. I really will. And one of the other things Jim Nagy said was he thinks that they're pretty high on Drew Lock and that he's pretty high on him and that he's still young enough. He's younger than some of the players. He's definitely, from a Hendon Hooker perspective, they're roughly the same. And he sees a great athlete, and I don't see it with Drew Lock. I mean, I know some people are enamored. I'm not at all excited about Drew Lock. So that has nothing to do with it for me. But you put that together with the potential. I mean, Schneider has very clearly been pro Drew Lock. That has been very, very, very clear.
Scouts like Drew Lock. He's got one of these, throws a really nice ball. He's got the tools. He's got the traits. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing coaches don't love Drew Lock. I'm guessing Nagy, he's the kind of guy that scout would fall in love with and think, if he just gets better coaching, we can fix this guy. I'm with you.
Well, but you put it together, Jeff. If the GM really loves him, the scouting department loves him, they have a starter in Geno, and the Seahawks have picked exactly 2 quarterbacks in, 13 years of drafts so far. I don't know that I see I don't know if I see the case that they're really going to use one of their top 83 picks, 5 picks in the top 83 on a quarterback. That seems like a stretch to me.
Yeah, I'd be okay with one of the guys at 5, but the Hooker thing, that scares. But I'll say this. I did a lot of research the other day on what people were saying about the Seahawks this time last year. There was so much chatter that the Seahawks were trying to trade up for Matt Corral and Desmond Ridder. And Mina Kimes is one of the smartest football minds in the country. She went on ESPN and was pleading the Seahawks to take Malik Willis in the second round. And I'm not even knocking Mina. I understand the concept of where the Seahawks looked at quarterback at the time. Malik Willis is very poorly regarded in the league. I heard Mike Vrabel just can't stand him. It's one of the reasons the GM got fired there, other than the AJ Brown trade. And people were pleading for them to take a third string quarterback and people lose their minds. Last year, people were convinced the Seahawks were trading up for Desmond Ridder and Corral and Sam Howell. And I think this just happens every year. We hear there's going to be a guy at the end of the first round. Someone's going to trade up, and they go in the third round.
Yeah. That could be Anthony Richardson this year. I don't think he's going to go in the third round, but I would not be shocked if Anthony Richardson, his floor is probably like Tennessee. But I could see him dropping into the late first round. I don't think that's out of the realm. I think he's one of the guys that potentially NFL teams see very differently than fans and some of the experts, the draft experts. So we'll see. We will see how it plays out. I've certainly put my money out there. I will admit that this notion that CJ Stroud could be available at 5 started for the first time to give me some question about, are the Seahawks maybe? Like, I think Stroud for me is a clean enough evaluation, and I think highly likely, much more likely to become a franchise Pro Bowl level quarterback than I think a lot of the other guys in this draft. I can get it. Anthony Richardson for me is a lottery ticket. And I think the odds that he's ever going to be, I think there's a decent chance you could get someone who can move the ball through unorthodox plays, out of structure plays, and never have the refinement. People talk about accuracy issues with Anthony Richardson, and they think that means like intermediate routes and timing. I think he's all right there. If you see him try to throw any touch passes under 10 yards or anything where he's trying to have any finesse on his throw, it's brutal, dude. It's not like, I mean, think about how much we talked about Russell with screen passes and how he could not throw them for his whole career. This is worse. Like, this is worse. And so he's a guy that I think he has one speed on his throw. It's a fastball. And that's
Trey Lance.
anyone that's played sports, that like kind of touch and finesse, that is hard to come by. That is something that's just tough. And there's a lot of people just guessing and trying to hope that that'll come around. But I don't know. I think it is tough to play quarterback in the NFL if you don't have the ability to really have that touch on short passes. So anyway, I think Anthony Richardson, one of one athlete, absolutely has, I think, a high floor in terms of being able to be a productive part of an offense. Can he be functional enough to be like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? That's where I mean, I don't even know if I put Lamar Jackson in that category yet. Lamar Jackson is fantastic. And has he been in a Super Bowl yet? Has he really come close to a Super Bowl?
Won one playoff game.
So I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know AR fans hate me. That's okay. We're allowed to have different points of view. But in any event, let's take some patron questions. And while we start getting those up here, Jeff, if folks haven't already, give the show a like. And hey, patreon.com/hawkblogger. That is how you get these questions answered. Sign up, get immediate access to the Slack channel. And we just gave our annual contribution a little early this year. We donated another $20,000 to Ben's fund. Able to hand that directly to John and Tracy Schneider. Saw a bunch of other guys. Saw KJ, Cliff, Walter, Doug. Doug and I talked for a while, caught up. A lot of the good folks there. And been doing a lot of good. This is now over $260,000 that we have contributed to charity since we started. And we couldn't do it without everyone on patreon.com/hawkblogger, all the patrons that have joined and supported the show. You're helping a lot of families. It makes a really, really big difference. So thank you all for your support, and join now so you can get access to the Slack channel, talk with everybody round the clock about this draft. It is a lot of fun, and you can ask questions that we will answer on the show. There are a lot tonight, so we will do our best to get through all of them. I will cut it off at some point so we can talk about some other things. So let's get started here, Jeff. You ready?
Let's do this.
All right. EM is the first person with a question and asks, if you could guess one player the Seahawks would trade up for, who would it be?
At 5?
That is not specified.
Let's say that they draft one of the defensive players at 5, Will Anderson or Carter, and Anthony Richardson is slipping, and he's a guy that they considered. If he's someone that they thought was in consideration at 5, and he's slipping to like late in the teens or mid-teens, I think that would be worth a move up for sure. And the other scenario, I would say, the second one would be if they take maybe 2 defensive players to start, and one of the scenarios they were considering was the center. I could see them moving back into the first round and taking a third first rounder and maybe taking a Schmitz or a Tippmann, moving up from 37. I'd say those are the 2 scenarios I see as move up.
I love that. I'm going to come back to you with another one. This is from, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Xijio. Zigio? What are the odds that Tariq announces our draft choice on Twitter before the announcement is made during the draft? Do you understand why that would happen?
No, so there must be something I'm missing there.
So neither one of us understand that question, and I don't think the odds are particularly good. As far as who knows the draft pick, the teams just call directly down and someone hands that out. So I don't think the players know before most of the rest of us.
No. There's a couple guys in the media who usually get it early and spoil it, but
someone's saying that he thinks that he meant Diggs because Quandre's always tweeting about stuff.
He's at the draft party, so
yeah, I don't think he will know. All right. Derek Woods asks, which pre-draft take has annoyed you the most?
Well, let me think. That's a hard one. There's been a lot. Anything come to mind for you?
I think that the take that's probably annoyed me the most is that the Seahawks have to take a quarterback because they don't have a quarterback yet. Geno's not the guy. He's a placeholder, and his contract is only for a year essentially, and they'll bring in. They need their franchise quarterback. I think that is flat wrong. I think Geno, you're going to have a hard time finding a quarterback across the league that you're going to be in better shape with over the next 3 years. People are going to remember this. It's on record. They can show this back to me, and I can look really stupid if it turns out to be false. But I think that is a really, really incorrect assessment of our quarterback situation, and I think it leads to incorrect assessments of how the Seahawks should approach the draft.
That's fair. I'd say from the league perspective, I'm just kind of sick of hearing this running back thing every year. Like the Bijan Robinson stuff. It's just like every day you hear the same conversation, you hear the same debate, and I'm sure Nathan would be yelling at me if he was on here. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just tired of it. How many times do we have to hear the same thing, that running backs have no value, and all this stuff? And I'm just a little tired of it. From the Seahawks, it's the Hendon Hooker stuff. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't understand how he's a first round pick all of a sudden. I just find that debate on him really, really, really annoying. And yeah, it's mostly been the Bijan one though. Like, I just can't read the same thing over and over and over again. And there's one now on like tight ends, and it's just like, my view is every draft is different. I don't like this idea that having a unified set of rules, and this is like a very unique tight end draft. So I think all tight ends takes in the past don't necessarily apply to this draft. So I don't like using past precedents to decide draft picks. And last year, like, we saw all these takes, like the Seahawks would never draft a pass protecting air raid tackle. Like I was talking about today, that was a consensus. I was terrified about that Trevor Penning guy last year. And the consensus in the media was there's no way Charles Cross would make it to 9. And we hear all this chatter, and then in the draft, we find out later John Schneider's sweating out to get Charles Cross, trying to trade up. So I don't like these ideas that like anything they've done in the past means they're going to do things in the future.
All right. Derek Woods again asks, what would be your favorite day 3 pick for the Hawks to make? And for folks that don't know, day 1 is first round, day 2 is second and third, day 3 is all the rest. So 4th round and later. Jeff, for me, the first name that comes to mind is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. As much as I've talked about quarterback, I love the Seahawks to take a quarterback late in this draft that has a chance. DTR is exactly the kind of guy I'd want them to take late in this draft. He is super toolsy. He's a lottery ticket too, and probably has a much lower chance than Anthony Richardson of becoming something. But so what? If you get him in the 5th round, in the 6th round, I think that's a great gamble to take on a guy that could end up being a franchise quarterback if everything works out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've been high on him for most of the process. I'm going to come back to running back here. Day 3 is where the Seahawks probably should take a running back. They need one, potentially. I think they need 2 running backs. And I think the perfect guy to pair up with a Kenneth Walker would be someone who plays a lot like Chris Carson. And Bijan Robinson's backup at Texas, his name Roschon Johnson. And he's at number 101 on the PFF big board. So he's kind of that fringe. He might even go day 2, but if he makes it to day 3, I think a Carson style back. And Danny Kelly was the first one to pointed this out to me. We were talking one day and he said, just send me the clip. He said, look how much this guy reminds me of Carson. And to pair that kind of runner who doesn't have much tread, he was Bijan's backup in college, and Carson was a backup in college. And to pair that guy with kind of Kenneth Walker and add like a short yardage back, I think day 3, that is where they need to get that number 2 back. I don't know if they need to take it on day 2. I'd like them to address other areas. And to me, that's a pick where you can get really, really good value. And like if you're taking an edge or a corner in day 3, like those are a lottery tickets. There's a lot of good running backs that come out of day 3. So I think taking one there, especially a power back and where the Seahawks have done pretty well, I think that would excite me.
Those are all great. I mean, there's a lot of guys, and I actually canceled my tee time Saturday morning so that I can. It's gonna be beautiful here as well, but I want to see. Like Dorian Williams is another guy I've talked about a lot. Yeah, Garrett Williams is another guy I've talked about a lot. He's supposed to be back in July from his ACL, so I think he's interesting. Man, I think that's going to be Eli Ricks is a guy. I think Andrew Voorhees is a guy.
Guards. There's a lot of guards that could work there.
Yeah, there's Anthony Bradford's an interesting guy, right? So there's a lot of interesting guys later in this draft for sure. Okay, Eric asks, what is the single most important quality related to rookie success with the Seahawks, i.e., scheme fit, athleticism, culture fit? And based on that single criteria, what player should the Seahawks target? I don't know that there's a single trait. I think it really depends by position. It depends on where the Seahawks are. It depends on who's surrounding them. Like, are they going to have to start this room of talent? Are they going to are they going to be in the safety room with Diggs and Jamal Adams? Or are they going to be in the defensive line room? They're going to be in the offensive line room where there's really no veterans right now. Talent, period, is the most important trait. Like, there's nothing you can't coach talent. And I know that's cliche, but it's just the truth.
Yeah, there's no real number 1 trait or tie of some of the guys that hit. Because, like, if you look at profiles, like Tariq Woolen's profile was not a guy I would have ever imagined would hit the ground running in year 1. He seemed like a total ball of clay. You got to mold him. And then some of the guys that seem more pro ready have not hit at all. And there's been Carson was a guy who just instantly hit right away. Like Doug Baldwin could tell right away this guy is a stud. Cross and Lucas, those guys were air raid tackles. And an offensive tackle in general don't hit in year 1 typically. And they both had to play above interior. And I don't know if you heard Geno on Sherman's podcast. I was listening to him talk about those guys. It was really, really cool. So, again, there's no profile that would have said that Woolen or those 2 guys. Running back is probably the one you'd expect to hit in year 1, but they've had mixed results on that. Penny took a while to get going. Walker obviously hit right away, but he didn't start until week 6. There's been pretty mixed. Chris and Michael didn't really hit year 1 or year 2 or year 3. But so, yeah, I don't see a tie. I think it's based on talent, position availability, and who's ready to make the leap. That could be anything, anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess to give this person a little bit more, Eric, I guess is who asked. The way I look at it generally and then try to assess whether they're going to be fits for Seattle are one, athletic talent. Like what can they do physically that no one else can do, or what level of athleticism do they have. 2, then I look at scheme fit and whether they make sense in the Seahawks system, whether they're like, there could be someone who's a super athletic guy who's just a tweener and doesn't make sense in a 3-4 the way they're running right now. And so I don't really pay much attention to those guys. And then 3 would start getting into things like, actually before scheme fit, it's athleticism and then it's production on the field in college. Like, had they actually translated that athleticism into any kind of production? I value the athleticism more than the production, because I think production in college doesn't always translate to the NFL. Athleticism does. And so, but I think those are the 2 things. And then I get into scheme fit, and then I get into, okay, who is this person and do they have the right mental makeup? So that's kind of how I rank the traits, but I'm not a scout. So take that for what it's worth. All right. Marvin asks, what would have to happen for you to be disappointed with the first round, Jeff? What would have to happen for you to be disappointed?
There have to be a couple things. I think a trade down from 5 where you end up with a non-premier player, unless you're getting that first round pick next year. Like, I know we've talked about like the possibility of like getting Houston's first round pick at 12. Like, say they move down to 8, get a third round pick, and then get like a Lucas Van Ness, a second tier defensive lineman, or number 1, or they pass on one of those blue chip guys. So there are scenarios where they can be upset. They've had a history of taking guys that were way different than what the media graded them. And there was years where like I didn't know Bruce Irvin, or I didn't know much about LJ Collier, and they've taken guys that were just out of nowhere. So I think the number 1 thing, they'd have to take someone out of nowhere. Number 2, I think trading out of like the premier spots and coming away with like an okay player. And the big one for me would be Hendon Hooker at 20. I'm really down on that idea. And there's a couple guys I'm conflicted about. Tyree Wilson's one I'm kind of conflicted about. I can see what they like, and he might go 2. So obviously it's not a crazy idea to take him at 5. But I think I would just be a little less excited if any of those scenarios happen. I think I know your answer, but
what do you think is my answer?
I think it's got to be a non-Stroud quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I would be generally disappointed if the first pick is a quarterback, for sure. I won't be crushed, but I think it's the wrong move. And I think the other thing for me would be, I mean, I can't get excited about Tyree Wilson yet. I'm trying, and I get it. At 5, it's hard for me. He's a guy that I could get excited about at 20 maybe, but honestly, even then, I'm more excited about guys like Will McDonald. I've been on him for a little while. Nolan Smith, those kind of guys. I think they have really interesting fits for what the Seahawks need and don't really have a good fit for. Yeah, I think those be some of the things that would, and then just typical, like if the Seahawks overdraft some, I don't know.
Levis at 5. I'd be pretty bad.
You'd be apoplectic. You would be. All right, let's keep moving on. All right, this is an important question, Jeff. This comes from Matt G. He asked, if Real Hawk Talk had to trade Evan Hill for cap reasons, which fan base would want to trade him? Which fan base would you want to trade him to? And which of their journalists, tweeters, peanut gallery would you want in return as compensation?
Ooh.
It's a tough question.
Yeah. Let me think of the standings here for a second. Like, obviously the funniest idea would the idea of Evan having to be a Niners fan. That would be the funniest scenario. But I couldn't do that to our friend. Let me look at a team that I think is tortured.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I think the Niners one's a funny one, both because they would probably eat him alive, and 2, I think the person we would maybe want back would be like Grant Cohn, who has been someone I've really despised for many years, and then over the last year, I find him hilarious. He trashes the 49ers more than I do, And so I really have enjoyed his Twitter feed lately.
This is a hard one. I'm trying to think of like Evan always used to talk about how the Seahawks are the most cursed franchise.
The Packers. Packers would be a good answer.
Would you want like who would we want from that fan base though? Like media back.
Could do Aaron Nagler.
Aaron Nagler's he's a pretty entertaining guy, but he's a bit of a homer. Trying to think of just like a real.
Is there any other journalist from another? I mean, Sheil Kapadia. You could get back maybe. That Sheil's great for Eagles.
A really funny one would be trading Evan, making Evan be a Rams fan now. And while the franchise just goes to shit potentially. And
then we get Mina Kimes back as.
Yeah, we get Mina or Jordan Rodriguez, a really good journalist.
Yeah.
And if we can make Mina no longer a trader, then we can make Evan not be able to have the Super Bowl years.
I like that. That's a good answer. Okay. This one's a long one. And I have no chance at all at pronouncing this name. It is Ackchyually. So you know who you are. And they ask, in the John Schneider, Pete Carroll era, which draft first round pick would you most wish we could have a do-over? And just to give you an idea of which are the first round picks for the Seahawks during that era, 2010 was Russell Okung, and doesn't show here, but it was also Earl. 2011 was James Carpenter. 2012 was Bruce Irvin. 2013 was traded for Percy. 14 traded down to P. Rich. That's what it says. 2015 traded for Jimmy Graham. 2016 Jermaine Ifedi. 2017 traded down twice for Malik McDowell. 2018 Rashad Penny. 2019 LJ Collier. 2020 Jordan Brooks. 2021 traded for Jamal Adams, and then 2022 Charles Cross. Who would you want most to do over?
2017. And if you followed me on Twitter, that was the year they took Malik McDowell. And this isn't because of Malik McDowell. If you want to like break my brain, go through the Seahawks draft that year and the amount of players they passed in that year. That was the George Kittle draft where they had 4 compensatory third picks and they took all bums. It was like Darbo, Hill, Tedrick Thompson. But the frustrating part of that draft is TJ Watt was on the clock when they first scored, and we've been trying to find like a defensive end. Like JJ Watt's brother has got the bloodlines, and he's sitting there right there. And Seahawks had an older defensive line group, and Frank Clark, and also that year there was a lot of mock drafts giving them Ryan Ramczyk, and Ryan Ramczyk was on the clock, I think, when they were on.
We both liked him.
We both liked him, and they had to trade for Dwayne Brown later and had to spend picks on other tackles. And to end up with trading down 4 times to get Malik McDowell. And that was a draft where you could have come out with like Watt and Kittle and Chris Godwin. And they ended up drafting all those positions, which was the frustrating part of that year. Even the safety, they took like Tedrick Thompson. Like I think Eddie Jackson went like 3 picks later. He was a pretty good player in Chicago. So that draft is the draft that just blows my brain. And TJ Watt is like blue chip defensive end. I talk about it all the time. It's so hard to get those guys. And the fact that we traded out of his slot or out of where he could have been to get a guy who never played it down, and like him or Ramczyk, that draft kills me.
I think that's the easy. I think that's arguably the most disastrous pick in Seahawks history. And you can go back to Dan McGuire, Rick Meyer. I think the follow-on, the knock-on effect of that, not just the pick, not just the fact that he never played it down, not just the fact that opportunity cost of who you passed on, but also the future moves you then made to trade for Sheldon Richardson and all the other things that followed. It was just a disaster. So that one's an easy answer. I do think that the trade for Jimmy Graham is close-ish. It's in the next realm for me. I think if the Seahawks had kept Max Unger, I think that they would have had a much better chance of returning to another Super Bowl than having made that trade. I think that was the beginning of the end for that era of Seahawks football, and a just really disastrous trade of strength and toughness for finesse, and it just was not a Seahawks move at all. All right, let's keep going. I will take a moment here while Jeff tends to things. If anyone was confused by my Twitter timeline yesterday, I want to address this. There was all the stories going on around Trey Lance, and there's these funny things going on where John Lynch was saying, well, yeah, Trey Lance is going to be on the 49ers next year, and we're not really fielding calls. And the clear implication in all of that is the 49ers desperately would like someone to trade for Trey Lance, and nobody's offering them anything of interest. So they're stuck with Trey Lance. And so I tweeted out a clearly fake tweet that John Schneider was quoted as saying that Drew Lock is going to be a Seahawk next year because not only do they think that he's great, but other teams are willing to trade draft capital to Seattle to make sure that Drew Lock stays in Seattle and off of their roster. I thought that was kind of funny. I also not a huge Drew Lock fan, so a little dig there. But the amount of people that read that and were like, what do you mean? I don't get it. Why would he say that? Why would they? That makes no sense. They wouldn't trade to keep him off their. I'm like, it's a joke, folks. It's a joke. When I tweeted last week that I was standing next to John, showed a picture of me and John and Tracy. P.S. I know who the Seahawks are going to draft. And I got all these responses. No, you don't. I'm like, I don't know. I think we need to consider shifting our charitable donation to some place that helps people understand sarcasm because I am sarcastic. That's going to continue. So anyway, let's keep going here. I appreciate that at least somebody found my tweets funny.
It's not the first time, too. I don't know if you remember, before the 49ers game, you made a tweet that, Tim Kawakami, one of the 49ers, you tweet something like the Seahawks were going to curl up into a ball or something. And he got so triggered that he was going at you and he blocked you. And then I went at him being like, you clearly missed the joke. And he blocked me and called me out. And it's not the first time.
He is a special snowflake, Tim Kawakami. Anyway, Tony in Montana asks if you had your pick of any projected. Oh, we already did day 3 player. So we're going to skip this. Sorry, Tony. Already answered. Alexander asks, are the Seahawks going to re-sign Puna or Woods if their draft board falls unfavorably?
I think there's a very good chance. The big question is, how do you make the money work? They still have a lot of work to do to get their cap figured out, but nose tackle is a position they still need some pro depth at. We're still not sure if they're running 3-4 or 4-3 next year. There's been chatter of both. But I think they would like to sign Puna, I think more so than Woods, to play nose tackle. I know Pete had mentioned that, but they got to make the money work. There was talks that Puna wanted a lot of money, and they don't have it. So after the draft is typically when you can get veterans back really, really cheap. And all the people freaking out about Woods, so they can get him back.
I don't know. Woods is fine as long as he's healthy somehow, but I'm not interested in Puna, but that's just me. All right. Mark Zuck asks, do you think this is Mark Zuckerberg? Is he a patron?
Yes, yeah.
This is an interesting one, Jeff. So listen carefully. It's pick number 5. Both Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are both on the board. The Hawks trade down 2 to 3 picks. What are you feeling at that moment?
I'd lose my mind. They'd have to go to 7, and you'd have to hope that the Raiders are coming up for a quarterback. And then the odds are good that one of them will be there. That would be the only. But if you go to 8 or something and they move up for one of the other guys, I think the only one would work if you knew the Raiders were taking a quarterback and you're guaranteeing one of them. But, oh, God, the idea of trading down and passing on both of them, I would be losing my mind.
It depends on the compensation. Most likely, I would be upset. But here's the thing that would give me some respite there, or some solace is a better word. If they weren't going to pick Jalen Carter no matter what, they've decided they weren't going to do it, and they move down and they get meaningful compensation for doing it, and then they get a player like Nolan Smith, or maybe they get, who knows? There's a few other players that could fit into that. Then I could wrap my head around it. I would be less upset in that scenario than if they stuck at 5 and picked someone else.
How would you feel if they took Witherspoon at 5?
I wouldn't love it if those other guys were available and they passed on him to take Witherspoon. I wouldn't love it. I wouldn't be like pissed, but I wouldn't love it.
No, that's a C. It's a C. C-minus grade.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really, man, it's going to be interesting come Thursday. All right. A few more questions here and then we'll go free flow. So Faz, I love that. Faz, F-A-Z asks, what's your go-to draft night food snack of choice? Do you have a go-to draft night?
I typically end up getting like wings or some sort of barbecue. Usually for the first night, it's some sort of barbecue meal and ribs, wings, pulled pork. And then I'll usually, day 2 is for the more hardcore. I'll usually go with some pizza or something. So
that's solid. It sounds like a very like typical football fare. I think that makes good sense.
Yeah, night 1's more of a party. Night 2 is like I want to lock in. I don't get something simple like pizza.
I like that. I do not have any go-tos, so I can't really participate. I'll leave that one for Jeff. Imani Waddell asks, will you have any special guests come in and talk draft during or after? As of right now, we do not have plans to do that, partially because I think we're going to be quite occupied in talking through what's going on. Here's how I think it's going to go down on Thursday, Jeff. We'll be lucky if Evan actually shows up for the portion he's supposed to. If he makes it to the 5th pick, which I think there's a decent chance he will, I think there is very little chance he will make it to the 20th pick. I hope he does. Maybe at least he'll drop off and come back, but I think that seems interesting to hope for that. So I think it's going to be a lot of Nathan and I, and then we may need to, reach out, see if there's anyone else that wants to join the show. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's some need to take some time. I'm probably just gonna be talking to myself half the time, and whoever's on the show at that point. So
I'm so jealous of you guys on the West Coast. I have to wait till 8:00 for the draft to even start.
Oof.
You guys 5:00. That's prime.
I know. Nathan's taking the day off work, man. I have so much respect for that. I cannot.
I thought about it, but then I think I'm going to lose my mind just sitting on my phone all day. I feel like I need work to get me through the day.
I think work's actually helpful that day to some extent. So, okay. Matt D asks, what do we draft first, linebacker or wide receiver? And who would it be, not including JSN?
I'm hoping wide receiver. I just don't like this linebacker class at all. There's a couple names like, sure, if they took Trent Simpson at the end of the 2nd round or Jack Campbell or any of those guys, I'd understand it. But I think talking to you today, like I haven't really dug into it even. I just don't really like the linebacker class, and I feel like it's being picked out of necessity rather than the best player. And I think there's like kind of a sweet spot for wide receivers. It's not a great wide receiver class. There's not a lot of super like wide receiver 1 potential guys like last year, but there's a lot of interesting 3rd receiver types. And I thought 20 for a while was a pivot point where you might be able to get the best of that tier of receivers. But as we kind of go along, I know it's common in mock drafts. I think it's less likely it's going to happen. I see day 2 is where the Seahawks are going to take a receiver. I think linebacker is totally up in the air, unless you consider like Will Anderson a linebacker. But I think like a guy like Jonathan Mingo or Josh Downs or Cedric Tillman, somewhere in there, I think round 2, round 3, I think that makes a lot of sense where you can probably use one of your second day 2 picks on receiver. I think linebackers, the right guy would have to fall.
Yeah, I don't know on this one. I think I lean a little towards the opposite direction because I think that linebacker falls off a cliff pretty deeply. I don't think there's a lot of later round linebackers I'm interested in where, I don't know, depending on where a guy like Charlie Jones goes, which I mean, I know I've been beating on that drum, but he could be a 4th or 5th round guy and maybe even later. I'm interested in him. And so I'm kind of curious, but we'll see. I've been having this sneaking suspicion lately that Jalen Hyatt's going to end up as a Seahawk, and that would definitely be an earlier.
How do you feel about that? I'm kind of conflicted on that one.
I don't love it. It's not because I'm like a big Jalen Hyatt fan, but he fits this mold of the straight line, take the top off type of third receiver that the Seahawks tried to pick in the past. That I don't know. There's just an instinct I have where I could see them deciding they want him as a quote factor in their offense, and I think of him as kind of a one-trick pony. So he's not my first choice.
Yeah, I don't love it either. He reminds me a lot of Will Fuller, who was on Houston a couple of years ago.
I like Will Fuller, though.
I like Will Fuller very much. Will Fuller was a much more explosive version of him. Will Fuller was a first-round pick. But I see, like you, I've been saying this for years. I think with G and maybe with Russell, someone like Hyatt would have made a lot more sense. But I think the Seahawks have a need for that slot receiver that could quickly win and wins with route running. And we saw it with Doug, and we haven't really seen it since. Lockett can play in the slot, but I want that like kind of jitterbug wide receiver. And it's why I've liked Zay Flowers and JSN so much. Those have been my guys. And Charlie Jones is kind of that discount version of that, where you can get him in the 4th or 5th round. So I think to complete this offense, I want that slot receiver. I don't want the downfield one-trick pony guy. I think that's too redundant of what they have already.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Gargom asks, there is so much talk of, quote, if Pete and John think it's a good pick, I will trust their judgment, unquote, around pick 5. They are the same duo who took LJ Collier, Rashad Penny, and Jordan Brooks in the first round to a bunch of criticism. Did last year's draft make everything good in the world? No matter who they select, it will be good with you.
No. It's been 10 years of awful drafts and one amazing one. And I don't like that line of thinking at all. It drives me crazy. I'm a Raptors fan, and I've become less and less one over the last couple of years. But there's that same line of thinking, like the Raptors drafted all these guys and now they're starting to fall off a bit. Just trust the front office. They never get anything wrong. I just think that's like almost cult-like thinking. And I think every pick, think for yourself. I don't trust anything they do. I disagree with a ton of things that John and Pete do. And one draft does not wipe out years of head-scratching ones. And hopefully last year was the start of a trend, and maybe they're just built to pick higher in these rounds. But no, I'm not there at all.
Well, there's also, if people really had been tuning in and reading the blog and following Twitter and the show, at least since we've been doing it, they would know, like, at least if you've read my articles post-draft, I was a huge fan of what they did in 2010. I talked about Cam Chancellor as soon as he was picked. I talked about Golden Tate. I mean, I liked what they did. It wasn't like I had to wait to trust them. 2011 came. I liked what they did there. 2012 came. I liked it wasn't like they were doing stuff that didn't make sense to me and I was just having to be convinced. They were making good picks that I actually happened in most cases agree with. And you got to 2013, and when they picked Christian Michael in the second round, I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like that is a terrible use of a second round pick. So from my perspective, I think we've been pretty consistent about when we like their draft picks, we tell you. When we don't like their draft picks, we tell you. We're not always right, but this isn't revisionist. It's never been I'm just going to assume they've got it figured out and we're wrong. I think that's been a broader fan base point of view because there's been so many, quote, no-name guys that worked out for them. But Richard Sherman was the guy that I liked from his what he could be for the Seahawks. I didn't think he was going to be what he became. Not claiming that, but I liked that pick the day it was made, and it's on the blog. You can go find exactly the day it was written. So I don't know. I don't just trust that they're going to do the right things. I do have more hope based off the fact that they made a lot of picks based off of talent last year and best player versus overdrafting need. And I think that's something I've written about, something we've talked about, you and I have talked about. And I think that if they are really going to, like this year, the risk is they're going to overcorrect for Malik McDowell and miss the chance to draft the best player for them. So that's one of the tests for me is this going to be the next cautionary tale? There's a chance for number 5 to be great. There's a chance for number 5 to be the next Aaron Curry, to be, the next just blown pick. And so, we'll have to see. All right, let's keep going. A couple more here. This comes from Z-Ray 2018. NFL sites comps the top cornerbacks to the following players. Which of these do you most agree with and which do you most disagree with? CJ Stroud is equivalent to Jared Goff. Bryce Young is equivalent to Drew Brees. Anthony Richardson is equivalent to Cam Newton. Will Levis is equivalent to Jay Cutler. Hendon Hooker is equivalent to Desmond Ridder.
Who do I agree with and who do I disagree with? Is that the question?
Who do you most agree with and who do you most disagree with? I'll jump out that CJ Stroud to Jared Goff. I don't like that at all.
That's been a big comparison in the league, but I think Stroud's upside is definitely better.
He is so much smarter than Jared Goff.
Yeah.
He's a way better decision maker than Jared Goff.
I'd say the Richardson to Newton one is pretty absurd. If you compare I know playing style and stylistically, you can see it, but they both essentially played 1 year in college. Cam Newton won the national champion, won the Heisman. He was like the best player in college football. He was he dominated at the SEC level, and Anthony Richardson struggled. So to compare that guy who was the number 1 overall pick to a guy who didn't come close to Cam Newton's impact in the 1 year in college football, I think that's pretty wild. I also
think Anthony Richardson, interestingly, is a way better passer than Cam Newton, at least mechanics wise. So I don't think it's like, hey, here's a black athletic quarterback. Let's all compare him to another big black athletic. I think that's a really lazy comp.
I do too. The throwing style is totally different. The accuracy is different. The way they
I think Anthony Richardson's more Josh Allen-ish. I don't know.
And I think the Levis Cutler one's pretty good.
That's I personally, I've thought of Bryce Young as a Drew Brees type of player. Although I think Bryce Young is a little bit more out of structure than Drew Brees, but I think he's much more of a distributor of the ball. I don't think of him as having like the rocket arm, but I think he could be a Drew Brees like player. Okay, last question. Would any of us trade up from 20 for Nolan Smith? I'm assuming it would take the 20th pick and probably our later second rounder. Jeff, I like Nolan Smith, man.
I do like Nolan Smith. I would not make that trade. I just think that goes against a lot of draft, how you build a draft, a lot of the way. I think that's a really risky way. If Nolan Smith doesn't hit, the opportunity cost of that is really dangerous. I think this team's in a position where having bites of the apple like that, having those 5 top 80 picks, I think is super valuable. So I don't think there's a huge difference to say between Nolan Smith and Will McDonald. And to me, giving up the ability to get one of those two guys, say you get Will McDonald instead, plus we get 50, I think that would be very, very risky.
Part of me is like, yeah, do it. And that's the emotional part because I do really like Nolan Smith and I think he's a great fit for what the Seahawks could use him for. But if you really imagine what is the perfect opportunity, what is the most ideal outcome for a Nolan Smith? Like what does he become in the ideal scenario?
Like
He
person.
becomes a rotational outside linebacker with Daryl Taylor, Uchenna Nwosu. He is a great run defender. He is good in coverage, and he is good for, I don't know, 7 to 8 sacks in a season, which is great. I mean, that's super valuable. It's super valuable, but I don't know that that's worth giving up what's likely to be another starter in that like the guys that we're talking about picking back in that 50-second pick, Jeff. That's where you might be talking about a Joe Tippmann. You might be talking about a Cody Malk. You might be talking about Steve Avila, depending on how that plays out. Maybe the tight end, maybe receiver. All guys. I mean, maybe Julius Brent, depending on where that play. Like, there's just some really good players that you're talking about losing, and I don't think it's worth trading up to lose that.
Yeah, and I just think when I go through these mock drafts or scenarios, I find I like basically every player that goes from like 32 to like 60.
Yes.
And like every time I read a mock draft or like a 2-rounder, I'm just like, I want this guy, I want this guy, I want this guy. I come out
from like 15 to 60. Like, I mean, like,
yeah,
a continuous list of guys that you want to have.
I know, like, that's the strength of the draft. You do not trade away your strength and numbers there. If anything, I'm hoping they add a third second rounder somehow.
Well, that's the thing, right? So I tweeted this way back, but the Seahawks they have essentially like 15 picks between their 5 and 20, between 20 and 37, between 37 and 52. It's all basically 15 picks apart. And then they have a 30 plus pick gap between 52 and 83, right? That to me is where you start talking about trading up. If you can package, they're not going to take 10 players in this draft. I don't believe it. If you can package up like some of your later picks and you can move somehow 83 up to the top half of the third round, I think that's a no-brainer. No-brainer. I think if you can move up, your fourth round pick, the Seahawks, I don't know if you like, I'm sure you did know this, but I didn't really realize it till I'd done enough seven round mocks, Jeff. The fifth round, they have 2 picks that are like 3 picks apart.
Yeah, from the what was the corner's name? Witherspoon, a Kello Witherspoon trade.
Yeah, from Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of those picks is going to be used, maybe both of them, but I think they are going to look to move up in the second round or third round. I think you're going to see them try to add another pick there, or at least move that 83rd pick up. That's when I think you're going to see them do things, but probably not as much before.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to the patrons. That was 22 questions that we answered. We went through all of them because I know people are as excited as we are. And frankly, we're happy to talk about it all. Patreon.com/HawkBlogger. Sign up now, get immediate access to the Slack channel, help us raise more money for charity, for the show, and have a great time talking to people along the way. So thanks for that. Jeff, who's like a guy that has really gained for you? Who's a guy? Are there guys that are rising for you right now where you're just like, man, I don't know where it's going to fall, but I would love to see this guy in the Seahawks.
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, there's definitely some of those guys. I've been so focused on Schmitz at center, and I think Joe Tippmann's a guy I've been a little more excited about, a little more open-minded to.
Yep.
I was really focused on him, but I think I'm more open. There's a bunch of guards that I've started to really, really get into. Cody Mouch is a good one. He can be just kind of a game changer at guard. I think there's a guy, Chandler Zavala from North Carolina State, who's a really interesting player. He's a guy who I think he could be like a 4th round pick. He's moving up a bit. he's a guy I think like you put that guy at right guard with Phil Haynes, and that's a really, really strong position group there. And I really focused on turning this offensive line into a position of strength. Julius Brents is a guy that has been pretty good throughout the whole process, so I don't know if he fits. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Sam Laporta at tight end is another one I like. Darnell Washington's obviously the guy that me and you have been kind of targeting. But Laporta is a guy like Iowa tight ends have been really, really successful in the NFL. He had really, really bad quarterback play, and he's a guy that like you saw with a lot of guys that have come out of Iowa, like they know how to block, they can hit the ground running. I focus on Musgrave and on Washington. He's a guy. Sam Laporta is a guy that intrigues me. I'm trying to think of anyone else that I'm missing. There's some guys that have gone the other way on. Yeah, anyone? How about you?
Well, I had to bring Cody Mauk on the screen because I mean, if you don't want this guy on your team, I don't know what you're doing. This guy, he belongs on the Seahawks. I would be so excited if they end up drafting Cody Mauk. I think the biggest gainers for me, I've talked about Nolan Smith. I've talked about Will McDonald for a while. That hasn't changed. I definitely have started to be more open to Joe Tippmann. Corey Trice is another guy we haven't really talked about. Corey Trice, I think some people know about, but this is a cornerback. He's also 6'3", 206. He is looking at PFF. He allowed 1 catch on 88 press snaps last year. He is an excellent press corner, I think, and he's got some amazing physical traits as well. So I think he's another guy that I've been kind of interested in. He's been jumping up the boards over time. So those are a couple guys. I mean, the thing that hasn't changed, Jeff, is like I want them to find a way to get Darnell Washington. I know they're not gonna, but man, that would be a lot of fun. I kind of brought up earlier this notion of, is this the most important Seahawks pick, the 5th pick in Seahawks history? And we don't spend a ton of time on this, but I just want to bring up, I was looking at, I'll actually just share this screen because it might as well I'll just see the same things I'm seeing. Let me just do it this way. Whoops. Okay. Let's see if I can share this in a way that'll make sense. Okay, window, entire screen. There we go. All right. So you should be seeing this now. So these are all the top 10 picks in Seahawks history. And I think I can even make it a little bit bigger for you. So as you look across this, I think you have to talk about not only where the picks were, how early, but also what the opportunity cost was. Like if they'd picked wrong or right, what was the impact? Who else was available? And then also the state of the team at the time. What was at stake? So like you could talk about Rick Meyer, the 2nd pick. That was the biggest pick in Seahawks history. But if you actually look at, I mean, first of all, the state of the team at that time, it wasn't a team that was on the rise or in a really great place to do something big. And you look at the opportunity cost. I mean, Marvin Jones, I don't think, I mean, these are not guys, a couple Pro Bowlers, Willie Roaf, who went 8th, but like there wasn't another player that if they had picked that quarterback instead of this quarterback, they would have been great. So I don't think that's it. I'm kind of curious if any of these jump out to you as pivotal picks at the time in the franchise history and from an opportunity cost perspective where you're like, man, because you look at the Aaron Curry pick.
Yeah, and I remember that draft. Mark Sanchez, I think, went next, and yeah,
He
look at
did.
that, Mark Sanchez. How do I remember that? I remember
And
that
you
year I wanted
look
Michael
at
Crabtree.
the All Pros. Look at the All Pros
Yeah,
for
I
that
really wanted
first
Michael
round.
Crabtree that year, and looking back, that would have been horrible.
There is one guy
Alex
in
Mack,
the entire first round that had an All Pro season.
yeah, wow. Clay Matthews never had an All Pro season. Wow.
He did.
Yeah.
He's the one.
Yeah.
But like, who else were they going to pick where you're going to say like, yeah, that was going to be a huge benefit over Aaron Curry?
Yeah, and it's hard to say that was the biggest draft in Seahawks history because they missed at the worst possible level, like complete whiff on that pick. And they ended up having the best era of Seahawks football in the history of the franchise. So obviously it wasn't that important.
Yeah, so I don't know, man. I think
last year's up there because like where they were as a team and where the direction were going, and Pete and John's reputation were on the line to come out and crush that pick. And I know the next picks were all pretty good, but a receiver or whatever, they all were receivers. If you end up without that left tackle and how it set the franchise up, and if you take like Jordan Davis, I don't think people are talking about this team the way it's set up the rest of the draft. I think last year's up there, but I think this year, just with the state of the franchise, where they are relative to the rest of the NFC. So last year was kind of house money the whole season. This is their chance to get great. And I can't think of any of those picks where it really impacted their ability to get great.
I agree. Should we do a mock draft for old time's sake?
I think we have to do one to end the show. This is
okay. Let's do it.
What simulator are you using?
Well, we could do a couple if you want.
I
I did hear PFF has updated their big board, so this might be a little different than what it's been.
Okay.
ESPN's got one as well. You know, how many rounds you want to do?
I'm down for 4 or 5.
Let's do a 5-round draft. Let's just do 7. We'll get through 7 fast.
Let's get ready.
Let's do it. So let me zoom in here for folks. And
I wonder how much this is updated with all the newest rumors.
So we're going to go pretty fast, but not turbo fast. We're going to see Bryce Young goes first, CJ Stroud, Jalen Carter. Is this an easy call?
So it's not updated with the newest rumors. Yeah, I would take Will Anderson.
I think that's right. I have a little pause, trade back thought, but I think that's right.
See, this draft is screwy already. Smith and Jigbo in 6. Cansey.
I will say Cansey, as much as I love him, I am increasingly skeptical that he's a guy the Seahawks. I've been kind of hopeful, but now I just listen to Jim Nagy talk about the physical specifications they had for cornerbacks, forget defensive linemen. It just was like, yeah, I don't know, man. Someone's going to really have to convince them and pound the table, and I just don't know if they'll do it. All right, so we're at 20. I mean, you already got edge, so I mean, I'm excited about this guy. I don't think they're going to go edge. There's been a lot of talk about Deonte Banks to the Seahawks.
Yeah, this is where I was going to say. This is where I'm conflicted because he seems like a great prospect to take. But I find every time I do one of these, like Julius Brents is in there in the next round, and I feel like, do I really need that corner at 20? I think I saw Mina put out hers, and they started Jalen Carter, Deonte Banks. So this might be a trade down.
Let's think about like what we think the Seahawks will do here. I think trade down is probably a really good bet.
I would trade.
They're not going to trade to 35. I don't buy that.
No. Maybe a 24, 23, 27.
Yeah, let's try 25. Split the difference here. I mean,
can we get 57?
I mean, I think that seems unlikely. Let's trade 57 for 123. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, I'll probably do that.
All right, accepted. All right. So now we're back here. Dalton Kincaid's still available. Is that the play, man? I mean, if he's available this late.
I think I'd still take Schmitz.
Interesting. He has risen up this board.
Yeah.
That is one change. He was so low on this board, man.
Yeah, he was like, I think that I'd be most disappointed if we come out without Schmitz. But how do you feel?
I think from a value standpoint, it would be hard for them to pass on Kincaid this late. So, I mean,
Kincaid's the best player on the board.
I think Zay Flowers is also a guy that would be a real consideration. I don't think Osiris Torrance. I don't think they'd go guard there. I think we should go with Schmitz. I still think that they really like him, and I think that could be the pick.
But this is exactly why I moved Carter over Anderson, because you draft Carter with Will McDonald here or some of the other edges. But I think it's very likely Will McDonald's on the board here. I think it just clears up that first two selections, and I think it makes so much sense.
I agree. All right, so we're gonna go John Michael Schmitz here.
We'll probably get a bad grade for that pick.
Screw him.
Yep.
Screw him. All right.
Okay, this is where things are going to be new now.
Oh, there goes Mazzy Smith at 36.
Well, look who's moved up the board.
Hey.
I think we got to take him. This is mine in your dream draft.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, Sam Laporta is skyrocketing. A lot of people, there's some people having him in the first round now. There is Hendon Hooker. I don't think
get him away.
Drew Sanders, I think, is an option. There's Cody.
See, I was thinking about Cody too, but can you get him in the next pick?
I think, given the way this mock's going, I might try to roll the dice. I mean, we could trade down again. Mm-hmm. We've never really traded down from this pick.
This is where I find myself stuck every time. I basically like every player on that list.
Let's do this, dude. Let's see. Like, it's only like 7 picks different. Let's see if can we get. No, there's no pick. No. If we traded,
I'd give up 83. No, that's too much.
What if we traded both of our fifths?
Well, I still don't like it. I would do it.
No, they would. They give that 55% chance.
Oh, yeah, I would do that.
So we move down 7 spots. We get another
third rounder, essentially.
Let's try this. Let's try how this plays out. All right, they're gonna do it. We're gonna see how we feel about it. There goes Hooker. Okay, it's painful. It's painful. It happened. We did it. We got to stick with it. How do you feel here? We've never drafted from this spot.
No.
You could go Laporta. You could go Drew Sanders. You could go Cody.
I kind of like Cody here.
Let's do it. I agree. Let's do it. Let's get Cody.
By
the way, I also like Tooley.
I like Tooley too. I think he might be the next pick, though.
All right, let's go Cody, because I think he's a hot commodity. I don't think he's going to last as much.
Drew Sanders, Adi
goes. That's tough. Okay, but see, we're back up, right? So now we still have a chance. Laporta. We still have a chance. We could bring Tooley. We've already got our center.
Keanu Benton is a nice one here.
That's right. He's a guy we haven't talked as much about. Big boy. Can play various spots here.
So they still are pretty low on Tippmann here. I think Tippmann would definitely be gone in the Reels draft.
Well, we've already got Schmitz.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that.
I think that's the flaw of this. Oh, Julius Brents.
So our next pick is 5 picks away. So this is part of the beauty of what we've done. So we could Trenton Simpson's another name.
So wow. So
there's a lot of choices here, dude. This is tough.
This is what I'm saying. Every time I go through these second round mock draft, I like Laporta, I like Tooley, I like the centers, I like Downs. I find myself needing second round picks.
So we have got no one at interior defensive line.
Yeah, I think we probably should take Brents or Benton. We haven't done enough on defense.
Yeah, I agree. So who's the guy that we think?
What about Siaki Ika? Where's he on here?
He's pretty low down. He's farther down this list.
He's really fallen.
Yeah, and I just don't think they'll take a player like him this high. I just don't.
Man, people like that Overshawn guy in linebacker.
I think Brent's is the higher upside guy here.
I think I go Brent's here.
All right, let's do that. Let's do that and see what happens. There goes Tippmann, Benton, Laporta goes down. Okay. So
still could go Thule.
We could go Thule. I think that probably makes sense because
Will Anderson.
The other option is Trenton Simpson because I have a little bit of concern from a linebacker,
which is not a bad option at all.
We do not have many
I think Trenton Simpson might be the pick here.
There's also Dayan Henley. Man, but are we really going to go the first 2 rounds without drafting a defensive lineman?
Yeah. How do you not take Thule here?
I think that's probably the pick, right?
I think Thule. You can get a linebacker later.
All right, let's do that. I mean, by the way, Zach Charbonnet is staring me in the face. But we're going to ignore him.
Don't do it. We'll get Roschon Johnson.
We're gonna ignore him. Nathan's in my head, man. He's somewhere listening. Okay, so we got Thule. I actually like this. I like how that's playing out. There goes Henley. Really okay, there goes Charbonnet. There goes Mingo. Mingo lasted a long time. All right, now we're at 75.
Ooh, Zavala.
So we've already got we got Brent's, right? So we don't need we've got a guard, we've got a center. Kobe Turner's an interesting name as well.
Yeah.
Michael Wilson. There is Siaki. This could be a logical place.
Yeah. And that Texas linebacker apparently has been.
Oh, I don't know if I know this guy. This is who you're talking about?
Yeah, he's the guy Louis Riddick I saw was really high on him. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know anything about him. So that's cool. After a dreadful, okay, so it sounds like he had a bad year.
21, yeah. I don't think they would take him here though.
Yeah. Do we have not done linebacker yet?
We have not. Ika's still there. Ojomo's still there.
Right, Garrett Williams. Well, they already did.
We have Brent.
Carl Brooks. Carl Brooks might be the move.
Yeah, here. Carl Brooks would be a good pick here.
Dorian, I know I've been a big fan of.
Running back. Tyler Steen, we have a guard already. Zach Pickens is another one.
Yeah.
Ooh, how do you not take Ika here? But
I know, right? I know.
Because we don't have that guy.
I mean, Kobe Turner, we haven't talked about as much either. He's a little bit like Thule.
That's what I will worry. It's kind of a little redundant.
Yeah. Short arms, so probably not going to go this direction. He's got some.
I think we need some size here.
All right, are we going to go Ika, man?
I think so. I think I'd be very happy with him here.
All right,
we got another pick coming.
We haven't done anything for receiver or tight end, right?
No, it's got to be the next pick.
Let's just make sure we know what we're passing up here. Tank Dell, I'm okay. I'm not.
No Tank Dell.
I'm okay with Rashee Rice passing him. Michael
Wilson, Marvin Mims.
Tyler Scott's an interesting guy, but he might be a little bit later.
I think there's no numbers at receiver.
And when's our next? So we got another pick coming up pretty soon. This is the benefit of these moves that we've made. Is we don't have to wait 30
and then you take the receiver next or the linebacker.
All right, let's take Ika.
Yeah, they're just
picking. There. It's okay. All right, this is good. This is good.
Michael Wilson is there.
Yeah, so that might be the pick, right? Tyler Scott's another guy we haven't talked as much about. He is a interesting guy in terms of a slot player as a former running back.
Small
dude for sure. 5'10", 177, young, 21. I'm kind of curious if they have anything else on him, but he's an interesting name. So what are we thinking here, man? We've got, well, let's just look at receiver. Let's look at tight end.
Jaden Reed is a guy people like as the slot receiver.
Schoonmaker is a guy people have talked about on the tight end side.
Yeah.
Parker Washington.
I think I got to take Parker Washington.
Or Charlie
He's
Jones.
got those Charlie Jones, bro. Maybe we wait. Maybe we wait.
Zach Kuntz. Do you know about Kuntz? Do you know about this guy, though?
I just know he ripped up the combine.
I mean, he's a freak.
Yeah.
6'7", 255. Like, might not be at all talented as a football player. He might be the Knicks' Jameson Kuntz. But freak athlete. All right. Here's where I am, and Jeff. I'm like, let's gamble to see if we can get Charlie Jones later.
Yeah. Where's our next pick? We don't pick for a while.
So we gave up. Where do we pick next, man?
I think we can get him later.
Do we have any? Like, we gave up our 5th round picks. Do we have any 4th round picks? Do we give up all our 4th round picks? I think we might have, dude. Yeah, it looks like we gave up our. So
all right, maybe we get to take Charlie Jones here.
This is the challenge.
Do we take Charlie Jones here and just overdraft him?
That's what I would want to do, but where are you at?
Too. I like him.
All right, this is probably a little. That's pretty crazy.
No, I think it's too early. We gotta wait.
Maybe we take Michael Wilson here.
Yeah, maybe we can get both.
Okay, let's take Michael Wilson here, and then we will see.
When's our next pick?
We got to fast forward this thing because my God, we're not picking for another year.
Well, this would be a long wait.
Oh, Carl Brooks, man, that would have been an interesting pick too. We left some meat on the board for sure. Oh, Charlie Jones went.
No,
damn it!
Wow, we gave up all our 4th and 5th round.
This is the downside of all those moves we made. Look at how much we have to wait all the way to the 6th round, and the end of the 6th round is
John. There's no way in hell John would ever do this. DTR,
oh, baby. So those are few names I love here. I like Keaton Mitchell. You know I like DTR, and I like Jared Clark.
We gotta take DTR. Stetson Bennett.
Yeah. I think that's the right pick, man.
Kenny McIntosh is an interesting guy, but DTR, we gotta take him.
All right, let's take DTR. I'm so fascinated to see how this draft. I remember all the decisions.
I feel like we got the entire 2nd round. What's our last pick? Running back?
Last pick. Yeah, it's probably got to be running back or linebacker, right?
Yeah. Travis Dye.
Let's take a look.
Oh, Chris Rodriguez is an interesting guy.
Linebacker. I love that pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, this guy is a freaking Mack truck.
Yeah.
Runs in a straight line. He is like the Chris Carson kind of guy in this draft.
Yeah, if we get him in the 7th round,
I think that's a great pick, man.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Let's see how this all plays out. We haven't done a draft like this. In all the mock drafts we've done, this one is unique.
Well, let's see.
They're gonna be like, "F you dumbasses! How do you trade all?"
Our defense looks awesome, though.
All right, so let's scroll down and see what they gave us. B+, whatever. But here is our haul, Jeff.
9 players.
9 players. You have got your offensive line of the future, which I think both of us sneakily feel like this is a key to this draft. If everything else goes wrong, if the 5th pick gets blown, if they still come out of it with a center and a guard that create the young, great starting offensive line, that this draft will still be a success, right?
Yeah.
And I love these two. I mean, talk about attitude and athleticism and just like nastiness. I love these two. How do you feel about Will Anderson, Cooley, and Siaki?
It's pretty good. I feel like I could use a little more size.
Yep.
A little more. It's where the Jalen Carter thing just works so well. But you got your 3-4 edge, you got your nose tackle, and then you got the edge off the 3-4 end, and then you really hit on multiple spots. And Tooley's like a locker room leader kind of guy. He's like a dominant practice player. I think you really hit a lot of things there in the front. I don't think you have necessarily enough dominant players in the interior, but you got a lot better.
I don't love that we didn't come out with our tight end.
Yeah, I'd say that's where I feel like we missed.
I think the tight end wide receiver, there's folks that really like Michael Wilson. I can't say I'm like all the way there. Feels a little rich. I did really like having all these choices up here. I mean, I like these names, seeing these names, then honestly seeing some of the names we would have been picking in the 5th round. I mean, there's some painful passes, but
yeah, not taking Darnell Washington and then ending up with Moch. That's the one.
How do you feel about that?
What did we end up with? 75. We gave up our entire 5th round. I just love the idea of getting that right guard and center locked in. Like that gives you the potential to have the best offensive line in the league.
I think this is a sneaky 6th and 7th round.
A+.
I think Rodriguez is a guy we haven't talked much about, but would be a home run 7th round pick.
Yeah, I think your team got a lot better.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't my
Will Anderson's an A+ on here.
Sure. I see that. I mean, I won't be disappointed if they get Will Anderson. That'd be crazy. My heart dropped a little bit when Jalen Carter's name was picked ahead. I'll just that's where I am, right? I think the John Michael Schmitz thing in the 1st round really affects. I mean, man, Jeff, this is the thing. You've brought it up a bunch of times tonight, but if you don't get Jalen Carter first, you are chasing defensive tackle the rest of this draft.
Yeah, that's why I find every time I do one of these, there's just multiple edge guys that you can get. Ojulari's the guy they visited with. Will McDonald. I just think, listen, Will Anderson gets an A+ here. A lot of people have him as the best player in the draft, and we're looking at this Hall rate. We haven't even said a word about him, but I just think for the whole thing, the way it works out, and this is a deep edge class. And after Jalen Carter, there's no one really like him at all the rest of the draft. So I think it's just very obvious how well that Carter thing sets up the rest of the draft and what you can do with all those picks where you're not chasing a position.
Man. Let's just take one quick look at how this 1st round played out. I think this is crazy. I don't know how
that lost me.
That doesn't make any sense.
No.
Devin Witherspoon that late seems a little crazy. I think that some of the tackles can end up invading the early part of that top 10.
Yeah, I don't think Tyree's going to last 13.
I do think this is the sweet spot for Nolan Smith.
So do I. If they draft Tyree Wilson number 2, then him and Nolan Smith make a ton of sense to pair it. Him and Anderson do not. They're coming.
Well, this is where I wonder, Jeff. I mean, I've talked with you about it. If they're not going to pick Jalen Carter, he's not available for some reason. And if someone like Stroud ends up falling, or someone that they love, trading from 5 to 12, getting that 1st round pick for the Texans next year. Now the Texans have 2 1st round picks next year. They have theirs and they have Cleveland's. You want theirs, right? If you can get their 1st round pick next year and you can go to 12 and you end up with Nolan Smith, I'm not sure that's the worst outcome.
No, I think if you can end up with Houston's 1st round pick next year, I think that's one of the best draft scenarios. Maybe the best draft scenario of anything. Because Houston's roster is bad. And they got a long way to go. I like their coach a lot. They're just kind of barren of talent. And I know everyone hates when we say the next draft, but you end up with 2 1st rounds this year, 2 1st rounds next year. And Houston, we all had so much fun cheering for Denver this year. Imagine cheering against Houston, where they're just barren of talent. And say they flop again and you end up with Caleb Williams or Marvin Harrison Jr., like, holy shit.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
I think that might be the best draft scenario, to be honest. It would be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but that's how you build a winner. You got
I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy. I think that they would very likely try to force the Cleveland first round pick on you.
That one would
And
excite me a lot less.
that's not as exciting for sure. But even there, Cleveland's, I don't know that we've seen that they're going to be great this year. And, but still, not my highest hope, but I think it's a real possibility. So, all right, we've been on for a couple hours, Jeff. Anything else that we should be talking about? Anything else going through your mind that we need to talk about before, since we won't get to talk draft night? Anything else on your mind?
Well, what do you want at 20? We haven't really talked about that. It's kind of gone under the shadows because there's been such a heated debate on Twitter about 5. What's your ideal scenario? I wanted JSN for a while. That seems cooked in the water. So curious what you want there.
Knowing that I want Jalen Carter at 5, obviously depends on what happens at 5, affects it. But my home run is Jalen Carter or Will McDonald. Alternatively, Nolan Smith. I don't think Nolan Smith is going to last that long. And if you get a Jalen Carter, then Will McDonald becomes, to me, I think, just going to say it again, dude. Will McDonald is a better pass rushing athlete. I'm not saying he's a better pass rusher, but he's a better pass rushing athlete than anyone else on the edge in this draft, as far as I'm concerned. He's better than Willie. He's bendier. He can get around corners more. And the thing that I think people sleep on, people are like, Will McDonald's super light. This guy played essentially like 4-tech. He played inside the tackle at times in Iowa. He was asked to do things that he should be outside the tackle. He should be essentially a 9-tech kind of player or an outside linebacker. I think you put someone who's tough enough to play inside against guards and tackles at 240, who's putting on weight and already has the bendy skills and athleticism. You put him as a 3-4 outside linebacker. That guy is going to be good against taking on blocks. He's going to be good against the run. He's going to be a good pass rusher. I think this guy could be the guy that in a few years people look back and they're like, how in the world could Will McDonald last into the 20s of this draft? That's I really, really, really believe in this guy. I see people in the chat talking about Kalijah Cansey. They know how much I love him. I just don't know that I see the Seahawks, especially if they take Carter first. I just don't see the Seahawks going that direction. Even before Cansey, I think I'd want to see a center, or I'd want to see tight end potentially. Like, those are some of the other positions that I feel like are premium opportunities in that first pick, or that's that first round. How about you?
Yeah, I think McDonald's really interesting. He's a little older, but again, he hasn't been used. It's such a rare thing where he was an interior lineman at 240, and at the Senior Bowl, which there's a lot of concerns from Seahawks fans about the Senior Bowl, but Will McDonald was like shot out of a cannon. They had a much better Senior Bowl last year. They pulled Abraham Lucas and Tariq Woolen, and they had a much better year at the Senior Bowl. But yeah, Will McDonald's going to. Michael Mayer's a guy I've really, really liked. I don't think that will take him. I don't see the Seahawks doing it based on their history, but I think he's a really good guy to just change their dynamic. Again, I would be very, very on board with Zay Flowers. I don't think they'll take him either. But Zay's a guy who I just think fits exactly what they need. I think he's an ascending player. Nolan Smith, it would be the dream if they end up with Jalen Carter. Not only are they teammates, they know each other. I think his character is just off the charts. He was the number 1 recruit in the country. To put those two together, both Georgia guys, to me, that's the dream. Mayer, I really like. I'm open to the center. I'm open to Schmitz. I know some people would absolutely, but I don't want to come out of this draft without a center and have Evan Brown play this year and them just be okay on the offensive line. I see 20 as a spot to pivot to either one of the best receivers or tight ends or one of the edge guys, but I can find Ojulari's a guy I'm interested in too, and he might be there at 37. Yep. So I think getting the best of something at 20, whether it's center, tight end, receiver, I think that's the idea that excites me. And whether if you go Will Anderson, you take Cansey at 20, that's a lot of juice coming to your team. So there's a lot of interesting guys. I'm so curious. That pick has almost gone under the radar for a lot of the Seahawks chatter.
I gotta ask you, and I know we're way past your bedtime here at this point, but the rumor that started today with the Reddit post, right? So we were talking about this before we got on tonight, but talk to people about what happened there. And it's about Will Levis, and it's about what's happened to his in the betting markets, where he's going to go. And I want to know, do you think there is any chance that it's accurate?
Well, we once had a guy named I Love Nude 69 go on KJR radio for a report to get back at Seahawks. So you never know what could be out on there, but some name, not absurd as that, but someone on Reddit with pretty anonymous profile. I think most people on Reddit are pretty anonymous, but posted that Will Levis is telling people that Carolina's going to take him first. And the betting markets were like so heavy on Bryce Young. It was like, if you know about betting, it was like minus 1,800 basically, which is like an absurd number. You never see numbers like that other than like Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck years. And all of a sudden, Will Levis had like incredibly low odds, shot up the betting market. And that one Reddit post caused Will Levis to become, I think, he's the second favorite now. And Bryce Young's numbers went down to, I think at one point it went down from minus 1,900 to like minus 1,000, which is absurd. And the betting for like when you bet on games, Vegas has people like guys who like work the lines and they're insiders and they're like very like sharp people. The draft betting markets are not like, anytime there's a mock draft that comes out from like one of the national guys, Peter King, Jeremiah, Schrager, when it's in the mock draft, rapidly shifts betting markets. And like one time I put a $50 bet on someone and it shifted the odds just from that bet. So to see someone from Reddit kind of throw that out there, I don't think there's any way. Everyone's just saying Bryce Young. Hey, take Will Levis. That would be one of the craziest draft stories, especially because of the Reddit guy. I think that'd be the craziest draft pick in maybe the history of the NFL. And it's got to be Bryce Young.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, last question, then I'll let you go. Tell me one thing that's going to happen draft night that's going to be shocking. What's a prediction you've got for, it could be a guy that's going to go way higher than other people are thinking, or a guy that's going to go way lower than what people are thinking. What's a prediction you've got about a just shock on Thursday night?
Like this Tyree Wilson to 2. I think if it wasn't so reported, that would have, if none of that stuff came out, that would have blew people away. I think that's very real. If you haven't been following the media, that might shock you when Tyree Wilson goes over Stroud and Will Anderson. I think there's a chance Bijan goes a lot higher than people think. It's just a weird draft where there's not a lot of like superstars. Atlanta at 8, Philly at 10. Like someone could shock and take Bijan. And I think there's a possibility that one of the quarterbacks drops pretty far. And I don't know if that's Richardson. I don't know if that's Levis. Those are a couple ones. I'm trying to think that Paris Johnson thing going to 3. That would have been that ended up happening, and that wasn't leaked. That would have been one of the crazier reactions. I'm trying to think of one other one. The Hendon Hooker thing. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, the other running back from Alabama, is going to go in the first round. I think that's going to shock. I think it's going to shock some people, and I think Nathan and Derek are going to be very either annoyed or they're going to laugh at it. But
as long as it's not to Seattle, they'll be okay.
No. Seattle, I don't think Seattle that works, but I think that guy's going to go in the first round. And I think a guy like Brian Brzee, I think he's going to drop a bit.
I will tell you one thing I think is going to happen, Jeff. We've talked about it a little bit, but I think it's greater than 50-50 chance that Noah Fant will be traded by the Seahawks during this draft. Not necessarily day one, but I believe that not only do they see other opportunities in this draft, but from a cap situation, there's such an incentive for them to get his salary off their books this year to be able to clear space for other acquisitions and there's good tight end options in this draft. I think they're going to sell him for pennies on a dollar. You might not get much. It might be a conditional pick next year. Like it may not be something meaningful, but I think Noah Fant has played his last game for the Seahawks. That's my fearless prediction.
It would make sense. And I think Nathan brought it up in one of our older shows. And it would really be a multiplying effect where they're not going to pay him next year to get red pick and give you the ability to add defensive linemen like your boy Puna or Woods. And that's probably where the money would go. So I don't know how you feel about that, but there's not a lot left in the free agent market. And
if it went to Shelby Harris, I could handle that.
Shelby Harris is an option. He's kind of fizzled. No, Seahawks.
I think all those guys are waiting until after the draft. Teams will find
but
out.
There's not much other than that. Like Seahawks don't have a ton of needs. There's not a lot of positions in free agency where you're like, okay, they need. There's not a lot of linebackers. There's no tight ends. So if you're getting rid of Fant, that's probably where the money's going. So.
All right, dude. I could keep going, but I know how late it is for you. Let's wrap there. And folks, if you haven't already, give the show a like, click subscribe, click the bell to get notified when we go live, because who knows, maybe something crazy will happen between now and the draft. Certainly after the draft starts, we will be live Thursday night starting at 4:00 Pacific time. That's at least the plan. And we will be doing pre-draft coverage all the way up until when the draft starts at 5. We will be going through the draft live. It will be Evan Hill, myself, Nathan Ernst, at least. We will look at see if there's other folks we choose to bring on or not. We will talk you through every single pick. You will see our reactions as they happen, which have been pretty priceless over the years and often prescient. So tune in, go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, join right now, get immediate access to the Slack channel where you too can be part of the conversation, not only then, but now and all the time in between. So patreon.com/hawkblogger. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons, man. It has been a pleasure, an honor and a privilege to do all this pre-draft hype with you all the way up until I can't wait to talk to you after the draft that first night. We will talk more and break it all down. A lot of interesting stuff ahead for us, my friend. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Go Hawks.